Taxi, taxi. If you're going to stand on the corner of New York City in the future and call a taxi, you might end up hopping into a Fisker Ocean electric vehicle. That's right, it's official. Fisker has sold all of their remaining inventory, wherever it is all over the world, to American Lease, a company that is going to buy these and make these New York City taxis, because New York City is one of the first major cities to mandate that all rideshare taxis be zero emissions or wheelchair accessible by 2030. Well, they definitely found themselves a deal, and it's official. Today on the podcast, we have Adam from Adam's EV Everything on, because he has been following the story to a T. He has actually called in and listened to the hearings because he's able to do so. So he has all the details on the details of the sale, what it means for software and hardware, how really optimistic American Lease is in this, seeing this as an opportunity, and what it means for owners, Fisker Ocean owners who do remain out there. Some of them don't want to trade in, some of them can't trade in their EVs for a different option. And so we're going to talk about the resources that are out there for y'all and the potential even more resources for hardware and software solutions in the future. So let's plug in for another episode of the Out of Spec podcast. I think this one is interesting for anyone who is curious about what happens to an EV automaker that really doesn't have the success that they sought out in the beginning. All right, let's go. This episode is made possible by the support we get from Fort Collins Kia. If you are in the market for any electric Kia, not only do they never add market adjustments, they will deliver your car to you anywhere in the 48 contiguous states for out-of-spec viewers. More information in the link in the show notes. Okay, everyone, we are joined again now by Adam, who runs Adam's Everything EV on YouTube and who has been on the podcast before. You were recently on talking about EV charging etiquette, and now you're on here because you are basically an expert in what it was like to own a Fisker, and now you've been really following along with what has gone on with this company because it's pretty intense. So we're going to get all the download today, but thank you again, Adam, for joining me on the Out of Spec podcast. I really appreciate it.
The pleasure's mine. Quick update. Some of your viewers are awesome. And they said, why don't we have cards for EV etiquette? And so I have actually published those. If you message me at adamsevreviews@yahoo.com, I'll send you some free ones out. So thanks for the plug on that last one. But this is kind of what I do on YouTube is Fisker. And it wasn't something I planned on, but happy to tell that story too if you're into it.
Definitely into it. Yeah. I mean, on the off chance that folks don't really know what we're talking about when it comes to Fisker, I do think it's interesting to just follow along with this, whether or not you know, even if this is your first time knowing about Fisker, because it is an EV startup that has not gone well. And hopefully we don't see that kind of thing, right? We want this to succeed. We want to have great products out there so people can drive electric. But this is an example of this not going well for the company and not really Fisker owners either. So can you maybe give me a brief background on Fisker as we know it today? Because in the recent history, it has gone through a lot as a company.
Sure. If you go on a Google deep dive, you may find one or two companies. The previous company was the Fisker Karma. They got some government funding. They went bankrupt in a completely different way because it was government funded. This is a private company. They went public through a SPAC. So that's the nature of the startup. A lot of investment. They did the hands-off approach, which was the manufacturing with the asset light model and kind of contracting everything out, which has come to bite them a little bit at this point. But they're an EV startup. They make an EV. The big plays here are a 360-mile range with their all-wheel drive trims. It's a good-looking vehicle. A lot of people say it's Range Rover-esque. I don't argue with that. Built by a good manufacturer, Magna. However, not all of the manufacturing things were, let's say, straightforward from that nature. But it's an EV startup that makes a car, and it's pretty good looking, and it's big range, lots of power. And that's kind of the good side of it. And then obviously there's a whole bad side. What happened was the manufacturing was ramping up, and then there were troubles with the finances, which we're kind of still figuring out what all took place. But basically the company ran out of money. The management wasn't done, let's say, optimally, for lack of a better term, at least at this point in the conversation. And they ended up filing for bankruptcy. And here we are. So we're now dealing with the aftermath of a car company that actually started and was able to produce and deliver vehicles, but now is in the process of being bankrupt. And the fact that they did make the vehicles now has kind of been a hindrance for owners because, well, you've got the issue of warranties and production and parts and service and connectivity. And I'm sure we can talk about all that, but I'm happy to answer any additional questions. I think that kind of gets you caught up. Startup, EV, pretty cool, long range, and bankrupt.
Yes, it's definitely not the best story, especially if you are a Fisker owner, and there are Fisker owners out there. I can't remember the exact sales numbers off the top of my head, but they sold like thousands of these to owners, and you were one of them, in fact, for a time, and now you're not. And I think at the end of the podcast, maybe you can tell us a bit about like how you came to that decision. But you've also been following, like we said, really closely with what has happened because you file for bankruptcy. You still have owners out there who have Fisker Oceans. Like, what is going on? And recently I did cover, that Fisker might be selling the last about 3,000 of these to a company called American Lease. And luckily you have the download from that. But maybe we can start with this Reddit post that was made. It's a message from American Lease, but basically the background, you can totally check out the podcast. You can check out Adam's stuff as well. But American Lease and Fisker are entering into agreement where American Lease, which it basically wants to buy these to be the taxis in New York City, these electric taxis, which is like, okay, American Lease, you really want to take this on like that? That's quite something. But yeah, can you tell me a little bit about American Lease and this post and like where this all starts to come together?
Yeah, sure. A lot to unpack there, but I can definitely catch you up. 6,000 units probably in owners' hands, somewhere around 4,000, 5,000 in the US. The remaining 3,000 and change, just over 3,000, are actually approved now to be purchased by American Lease. And in this Reddit post, they're basically saying we got the court approval and we're going to try to work with the Fisker Owners Association on a plan going forward. Parts and, any service things. We don't know what we're going to do yet, but we're definitely on your side and we're going to try to help you out. And that's, in a nutshell, what this is saying. But they also are saying that dealing with a retail customer is not something American Lease does. The reason why this was probably, let's not say smart or not smart investment, because we don't know how this is all going to unfold still kind of, but the reason why this opportunity made sense for American Lease is because there's a mandate that all ride shares need to be electric in New York City by 2030. That's a big deal. They saw this as an opportunity to jump on it and get ahead of that game and say, hey, we can upgrade our fleet now. We can get some, higher quality stuff driving around New York that's electric. But on the other side of that, they have a lot of things that they're going to need to solve. And basically they're saying that we're in the process of solving that and we haven't forgotten about you owners. And that's kind of where they're at with that. It wasn't real specific.
No, and it is interesting. What you're saying is that American Lease has the option, to get a pretty good deal. All right, we can electrify our fleet. Sure, let's take this on. But it's not like they're buying Teslas with a well-established or any other established automaker that's making EVs. They're buying them off of a automaker that is filed for bankruptcy. So from what we know about today, you actually have been attending these. Is it a hearing? Is that what they're technically called?
Yeah. Because I did own an Ocean, I could be a potential creditor, which gives me the ability to attend publicly you can attend them by phone anyway, but I'm attending these hearings. I'm listening to what's going on and I'm just trying to break down step by step from, cause I'm standing on the outside of this now too. I don't have an Ocean anymore, but from a consumer standpoint, a person of interest, what is going on. And the approval of the sale did a lot of things good and a lot of things strange and a lot of things that are going to be really bespoke. American Lease is not unfamiliar with the business of manufacturing, not on their own, but dealing with suppliers directly. They have done that before. Obviously, they have a large fleet of vehicles and those kinds of things need to happen. in the event that, these are New York City taxis. They're not driveway ornaments. These things are being driven, they're having incidents on a regular basis, and maintenance is extremely complex and in-depth. So that's not really a challenge for them. And by the time this podcast comes out, I will have an interview with Josh from American Lease, kind of going into more detail about those specifics. And it'll be on the channel. My patrons will have it now, but it'll be very, very soon. So they're not strangers to this, but you're absolutely right. And it's a massive undertaking, period. And so that's kind of where that deal is. But there are a lot of stipulations in these agreements as far as what needs to be done and how it needs to be done. And that's when owners kind of start to have concerns, because we have this recall. And if you wanted to get into that, I can do that right now.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
So there's a water pump failure potential, and it's a stop sale. You remember the Blazer EV, we had the software problem beginning of this year. Stop sale was administered. They were out, until that was remedied. That's the same deal with the Fiskers. Now, a stop sale, we want to make sure that we know that doesn't mean if you own the car that you have to stop driving it. It means that if they're going to sell them, there needs to be a remedy first. At least that's how this agreement ended up shaking out. And so there's the disconnect between what does an owner do, or how's that going to work for an owner, because American Lease is required to have this remedied, this recall for the water pump. And there's also a door handle recall and some other software recalls. The software recalls are basically remedied. The door handle thing is kind of a as needed basis, but this water pump has a potential to fail, and it's a low failure rate, probably, like a normal recall, 1 to 5 to 10% at the absolute maximum. But these things are happening to customers. And so how do they remedy that? Well, American Lease is going to get these done, because they won't accept delivery based on the terms of this agreement until each one of these are remedied. Now that presents a problem, because Fisker is at the very end of their existence, let's just say, at least their current existence. So employees are extremely short, and now they're going to have to make sure that all these recalls are remedied for American Lease. But as far as the customers go, they're only going to get basically a dedication to a remedy up until the end of either the Chapter 11 or Chapter 7 proceeding, which we can talk about the difference between those and what's going to happen with that. But really the biggest front of mind thing for an owner is this recall. So there's a water pump recall. American Lease is going to get these remedied. What are owners going to do? So that's that part. And then like I said, I have a pretty deep knowledge of what's going on. So as Francie, what's the next thing you want to talk about?
Yeah, so that's part of like the sale details, is that this is a mandate. You have to get the stop sale fixed, basically the recall that caused it fixed. What are the other sale details that are of note to you? I know that one that I think is of note is, of course, this involvement of the Fisker Ocean Association, so Fisker Owners Association, and involving actually in an owners association. So yeah, maybe tell me a little bit more of the sale details.
So if you don't mind me reading it, the paragraph that addresses that says, debtors shall take commercially reasonable steps to ensure that A, owners of the vehicles as of the petition date will have, or instruction provided to buyer in connection. So first thing, they're going to get communication. That's number one. Number two, existing owners have reasonable access to necessary software updates and spare parts and supplies from the date of entry of this order until the date upon which the decree is entered, closing either the Chapter 11 or Chapter 7. So for now, they would need to continue to provide parts and software. And then any stop sale hold affecting any existing owner's vehicle is cleared as promptly as practicable prior to entry of a final decree, once again, closing either the Chapter 11 or Chapter 7. So basically they're saying, we will continue to give you parts and software, and we will remedy this recall. But the problem is Fisker needs the money to do that, and they also need the manpower to do that. And these things are not, once you go into bankruptcy, manpower and money are not something you control anymore. These are determined by the court. How much money is going to this? How much money is going to that? The big concern, at least on the hearing Tuesday, was the representation from the Fisker Owners Association had a concern that this $300,000 they've estimated that's going to cost to remedy these water pump recalls is either not going to be allocated, or if in the event it is allocated, there won't be the manpower to provide it. So that's pretty much the biggest threat to the existence for the owners, at least right now. Remember, bankruptcy's not over. We finished the sale, and now the sale is all about money. And the next problem, I guess, for owners is going to be money. And then we can get into a whole other spiel about that. But I think that's probably the biggest question mark in the American Lease deal, at least from a consumer or somebody outside of this inception that's going on standpoint. That's really important, is that yes, it is decreed in there, but there's not enough effort being put forth to at least make an owner feel comfortable right now. And that's kind of the sentiment of the Owners Association and American Lease. Like, we're going to try to help you. We're trying to work that out. But that's the whole thing, is that what's going to happen next. I hope that isn't too confusing.
No, I don't think so. And I think I would love to, earlier you kind of laid it out as a SWOT analysis. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of the sale from the owner's perspective specifically. Because if I am thinking about who is this information most beneficial to, the people who have Fisker Oceans or, these products and don't have a connection to American Lease or don't really know what to do, can't get out of it or don't want to get out of it. So maybe could you lay that out? Like, what are some of the strengths that this sale will provide to owners? What's good about it?
Sure. Well, obviously American Lease is going to be involved now. So that presents an opportunity of scale when it comes to parts and negotiations and cloud servicing potentially. We don't know what's going to happen with the cloud servicing, but American Lease has a guarantee. They have a non-exclusive license that's also in this agreement for all those things that make the ocean tick. Let's say the access to cloud service, the LTE, all the technological stuff, future updates if there are any by Fisker, and access to the tools necessary to access all that stuff. So that's in the agreement. There's a non-exclusive license, but American Lease, it's also in the agreement. American Lease cannot help anyone else with that section. It's just for them and just for the cars that they own, at least in the agreement. So, but the strength there is that there is going to be something that exists going forward. Because in a Chapter 7, had these cars been auctioned to individuals, it would just be, well, figure it out on your own. So at least you have one large entity with large financial interest trying to keep them on the road. And obviously, the Owners Association is a second large entity of interest. So that's a strength. Continued existence of parts. Like I said, American Lease is not afraid to manufacture. And this is all based on things that I've been told by Josh from American Lease. I'm not extrapolating here. They're not unfamiliar to manufacturing. They will do what needs to be done to get this to happen. So those are basically the two biggest strengths. I know I mentioned some to you earlier. I don't know if I included anything else.
I think those are the main points now owners have a different entity to look towards that isn't just Reddit threads or people that they find online to try to help that guidance. And I mean, I still am surprised that American Lease wants to take all this on with manufacturing parts and all that, but they are seeing it obviously as an opportunity. I think one thing that you did point to for the weaknesses is that software is up in the air, and EVs are all about software. And Fisker also or these Oceans didn't start with the best software. There were promises for software. So I think like the IP comes into things, and that gets a little bit difficult. Am I right?
Yeah, and also it's not finished because we've sold the vehicles, right? There's still tooling in Austria that may be dealt with through the Austrian bankruptcy. Also, just on the Austrian front, a big chunk of these vehicles are not in the U.S. They are U.S. spec, but they're not in the U.S. yet. It's like 598 cars are either in Belgium at a port or in a holding in Austria or in the manufacturing lot still in Austria. The thing is, once the insolvency process started in Austria, well, you can't move those cars. And they have to have a financial remedy if you are going to move them. And so Fisker is a big issue at the hearing was, how do we transfer that money and how's that going to work? Essentially, it's a $2.35 million movement of money that has to go from the U.S. to Austria in order for this transaction to be completed, at least these 30% of vehicles. So, but on the topic of software, the IP needs to be sold, right? So we don't know who's going to buy that. And we don't know, I know obviously the dream would be for American Lease to also buy the IP. But I think you and I both know that anything you do online is expensive, right? And so like if you want to use like this service we're using right now to talk to each other, there's a cost, right? So cloud servicing is going to be very expensive and it's an immediate liability. American Lease already took on a big liability because these vehicles were sold as is, where is, which means Fisker every day is incurring costs to park these things at either Odessa or a lot in Houston, or let's say one of the contract dealerships that they had. All these vehicles are being stored places, and now they have to figure out a way to pay them to get these, and a lot of them, maybe all those payments aren't up to date. American Lease took that on and said, we're going to figure out a way to get them all to us. Fisker is off the table there. But as far as the cloud storage and all that stuff, it's a huge cost, and it's going to be a big investment for somebody to take on. So obviously American Lease takes that on. Well, now they've got everything, and they can then in turn license the owners association all of these cloud services, but we don't know if that's going to take place yet. And also, is that going to make sense for American Lease to do? So software and all those things are very much up in the air. Who's going to do it? How's it going to work? And right now in the interim, it's just a big question mark. And the owners associations made that clear. We're trying, but we don't know. And American Lease has made that clear. We're going to try to work something out to where it makes sense for everybody, but we have to deal with ourselves first and primarily. And if something would present itself that makes sense, well, then yeah, we'll figure that out. So yeah, software, huge problem, weakness, threat, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, if we're talking weaknesses, I'd say that access to software going forward is going to be a problem. And I can I can hear people think, well, what does that mean? Well, you pay what, $100 a month if you have a phone from T-Mobile or whatever. Well, if that doesn't, if we don't get a remedy, that's going to be your responsibility. You're going to have to pay for T-Mobile. You're going to have to pay TomTom for navigation. You're going to have to pay, that cloud servicing. If you have iCloud on Apple, you've got $10 a month there. So all this is just going to be extra cost. And even in the event that it all goes one way for one supplier and it's one simple thing, that owners association is going to have to in turn move that cost onto you because they're going to be in control of it in the event they want to get in control. And that's another thing we can talk about. Because if we want, I just move to opportunities. The Fisker Owners Association, they have to decide as a group, how deep do we want to go? Do we want to buy parts from American Lease? In that case, American Lease needs to source them, store them, sell them, move them around. Well, that's a for-profit business, obviously. So that's going to increase the cost, but for the owners association, it makes it easier. But if they want to get involved in that, how involved do they want to get? Do they want to be, and I'm sure they're already contacting suppliers and people. Remember, all of this is from a third-person point of view because I don't own an Ocean. So I'm not part of the association. I mean, obviously, all of these documents, I know exactly what's going on, but, they haven't decided yet. And at least from what I know, that's going to take a while. But as far as parts goes, does the owners association want to get in contact with basically some small service places, get in contact with previous technicians and kind of install a third party, let's say boutique type of deal, which I'm sure will happen, whether or not no matter how this works, there will be boutique shops that are doing it. It's just the relationships that they have and who with are kind of up in the air. So,
so they might just be, they kind of get to choose their role here right now. And this is one of the things that's up in the air. So they can either just continue to be a resource of information and community for Fisker owners, or they could get more involved in the orders, warehousing, local shops side and be more active.
Yes, but also no matter what, at this point, the owners association has taken upon themselves to be a direct point of contact to American Lease in regards to that relationship. So if you don't join the owners association, you're sitting on a time bomb. It's basically, they've made it a requirement to join this association. Now there are fees associated with that. Now I'm not saying it's a bad thing because, we can get to that too. Like, well, the opportunities, since we're still on that, is you get to join this cool little club, right? because that's what it is at this point. Hey, we own an ocean, we're part of this cool club. The company went bankrupt, but we're just keeping these on the road, and we are all one unit. Obviously, they have to stay in communication. So that's a cool opportunity that you have. But then those extra costs that come along with it are going to be, whatever they are. At the end of the rope, this is no longer a traditional ownership experience of any kind. The warranty is going to be either allocated a small part in bankruptcy or not. I know there are $1 billion worth of liabilities in Austria. There are billions of dollars, probably close to another $1 billion around in liabilities here in the United States. And so $44 million does not translate to me as any kind of, remedy for that, except at a very, very small percentage. So that's, as far as opportunities, I think that mostly covers it.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully if someone does take the software and runs with it, that owners would have access to like bug fixes or some kind of updates, but that's still up in the air, but it's an opportunity.
Right. Yeah. I mean, American Lease is obviously going to be working on that too. And in the event that those remedies are established, then I'm sure there'll be communication on how they can be obtained. It's just that's all. It's going to be a really complex framework. And the whole point of, when you look at it, why did Fisker go bankrupt? Well, a lot of the things involved this uncertainty that came with the startup. They didn't set up a service network. They didn't set up a delivery network. And these dealerships were really just consigners that said, hey, we'll take delivery of some of your vehicles and keep them on our lot. And in the event that we sell them, we'll get a commission. So, that was a lot of making a service appointment. I know as an owner, the very last thing I did before I traded my car in is I let them know that I had this urgent safety problem. And I got them to come out to my car. And I said, okay, the lights that keep coming on in the middle of the night in the back of my car, unplug them. And I said, the fan that won't stop running on my rearview mirror. Yes, the rearview mirror has a fan and it just runs. And it wouldn't stop running. So I said, I got all my little service things taken care of. My door fell apart. The rear door just came out and I had to push it back together. And so I got all these things done before I traded the car in, because I knew, that was maybe 4 weeks before bankruptcy. It was more than that, maybe a month and a half. Either way, I knew the end was coming. It's all on my channel in order. In fact, I have a playlist of the Fisker demise in order. And if you want to watch my sentiments go from excitement to jubilation to questioning to uncertainty to anger, and then all the stages of grief. And I'll shout out Brian, the EVOG, who's been on here. Subscribe to him. He's done a real good job at detailing all that. But I think, and then the next thing, I guess, I apologize if I'm taking the floor here, but we get to threats, right? Finally, the threat is going to be Chapter 7, because it was said in the hearing that Chapter 11 will be more expensive to finish out this process, because a Chapter 11 is not necessarily a continuation. It can be a liquidation, and that's what this is. It's a Chapter 11 liquidation, which means the company's still in control, and we are ending things, right? A Chapter 7 liquidation says the company's no longer in control. There's a trustee that's doing the sale, and whatever happens, happens. So this bankruptcy itself has already been requested by Heights Capital, and we haven't even gotten into them yet, that it be converted to a Chapter 7, which kind of ends Fisker as an entity and starts a full-fledged liquidation process. So that's a big threat to current owners, because that ability to get those remedies for the recall, which, once again, service was hard when they were a company, it's even harder now. There might be 15 people out there that can do this, at least from Fisker, and paid for. Now, there are other ways to get it done. Like I said, American Lease can say, hey, we're going to work with the Owners Association to get this manufacturer to get these water pumps and send them somewhere. And then can we find somebody else that's able enough to put them in, and certified to do so? So that can be done. But Chapter 7 is a huge threat. And then obviously whoever purchases the IP, that's another gigantic threat. I think that's a pretty good that's a pretty good SWOT analysis. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm sure I've left something out. Let me know how dumb I am in the comments, right?
I think you're giving people a lot more information than we have, because you are following along. And you did mention Heights Capital, which is, they are probably not having the best time. So they're like the lender, the note holder. Tell me a little bit about them and how this plays into the bankruptcy going from a Chapter 11 to a Chapter 7, or at least being motioned to.
Yeah. The Heights Capital is in control of the company right now. They have a lien on all the assets. They are okay. Bankruptcy. Let me just run it down really quickly for you. Bankruptcy is a tiered payout. Secured lenders, that means you have some kind of interest, right? You have, that's like your house is a mortgage. That's a secured loan. An unsecured loan is a credit card. There's nothing actually attached to it, right? So secured lenders get the money first, and then next is going to be unsecured creditors with priority. That's employees and stuff and taxes. And then regular unsecured creditors. That's mostly everyone else. That's Chase and TomTom and Microsoft and people who've been providing services to Fisker they were unable to pay, as well as owners who are able to register as unsecured creditors. And then finally, equity holders. So that's the tiered system of bankruptcy. Now, Heights went from an unsecured creditor when they loaned Fisker $490 million to a secured creditor through contracts. They essentially said, if you want this money by this time, you agree to take the money. But if you mess up, we take your stuff, essentially. And Fisker messed up and continued to mess up. And so right now, Heights Capital, to the tune of about $180 million, has first access to all the remaining assets. So if you take $44 million and you say, well, Heights is owed $180 million. Now, obviously, these will be settled in bankruptcy court. So these numbers, we don't know exactly where they'll land. We know 44 million is what Fisker has now. But remember, every day there are handfuls of legal representation and contracts and leases and employees.
Yeah.
So that money disappears a little bit more each day. But either way, you've got Heights Capital is this big lender. They've loaned Fisker all this money. Then they've secured through default, essentially, all of Fisker's assets. And now the bankruptcy court has to decide where all this goes. But at the end of the day, cash collateral, that's the money that Fisker continues to use right now to exist, is being provided by Heights Capital. And if they convert to a Chapter 7, that's when everything changes. So I hope I explained that well.
Yeah, I think so. And from all of this, I think any owner can start to understand what their future might look like a little bit if they decide to still own a Fisker Ocean. And I want to know from what you've observed, and I know that you traded in your own, so you don't have it anymore, but like what are the options that they're looking at? What might you even suggest for someone who's out there who has options to either keep or maybe trade it in? What would you suggest for owners to do?
Well, first of all, you hit the nail on the head. A lot of people are stuck, right? I have a $1,200 a month loan or $800 a month loan to whoever I borrowed the money from. Chase was Fisker Finance, so a lot of them are to Chase. But I'm stuck, right? I can't get out. If I get out, I'm going to have to come up with $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 cash in order to settle this loan because my car is worth 20% of what it was when I did that. So those people are stuck. In the event that you're not stuck, right? Because if you're stuck, the Fisker Owners Association is a big deal for you. It's going to be a good thing to be able to keep your car on the road. The American Lease deal is a good thing because parts may be sourced in the future. So while you continue to pay for this car and then make a decision later about what to do with it, you're okay. But if you have an opportunity right now, let's say you've paid for it or you have the financial wherewithal to make a decision about whether or not to keep it. Let's look at both sides of the coin. I said before in the opportunities, you get to be part of this club. This is a really cool story. I know whenever I pulled up to places, I would evacuate the place. I pull up to Advanced Auto Parts, the whole place empties itself out. Now, I decided to get rid of it because it went from, man, that's a cool car to, hey, isn't that the bankrupt car? So that conversation has changed, but it's still a rare car. You get to be a part of the club. The other side is you're no longer dealing with an ownership experience like a regular one. You're going to have to be involved. You're going to have to spend time and effort and additional money to keep your car on the road. It's not just, hey, the owners association is going to keep me on the road. You're going to need to join. You're going to need to make sure you stay up to date with all they're doing. There will be financial commitments. In the event you need service, you may have to travel long distances or have your vehicle moved long distances. And all of that's going to be out of your own pocket. So things like insurance may get extremely expensive. And just to add, there's been a lot of discussion about outsourcing or open sourcing the source code. Well, the source code's approved by NHTSA, and if you get out of that, then all of that risk you're taking on your own. You know, the insurance company won't pay out if something happens to your software. You're in an accident with someone else, you'll be personally liable instead of your insurance company. So open source software code is not something that, I mean, really is going to play a part. But if you want to get out, you know, it's going to be advantageous if you like a regular car experience, because this is not that anymore. I hope that.
No. Yeah. And there's no warranty either. So there's just really there's no backup. Exactly. Like, you're going to have to be involved. But maybe, you know, I met someone who I was at a charger and he was like, I'm going to keep mine. So he might have the attitude where it's like, I want to look on the bright side and make this a project and become a part of a group. But you were, and Brian, OGEV, who has come onto the podcast and has documented his experience from delivery to trade-in, y'all decided, I'm going to trade in, which is also, I'd love to hear your story, because it's also not an easy car to trade in. So can you tell me how that all unfolded?
Yeah, mine was a competition. And I have a full in-depth review of my current car, which I'll get to in a second. So if you want to check out my channel, I'll be able to give you some more detail on that. But I got rid of mine with a competition. So I was trying to find, I'm a Honda guy, by the way. Have you ever owned any Hondas?
Yeah, my mom had a Honda Pilot that became my brother's first car, and that thing truly ran until it was parked and someone totaled it. But that thing runs with the lights on, you know, a check engine forever. Those are pretty good cars.
So, you know, like I was in that boat, right? Mm-hmm. Hondas are affordable, they're efficient, and, you know, they run forever, right? There's this reputation. Yeah. Honda and Toyota are kind of similar in that vein. Mm-hmm. So I was a Honda guy my whole life, and I really was interested in this Prologue, not only the Ultium platform, but the fact that it's a one-off car that's being developed in conjunction with GM, but really it's just a GM car with a Honda badge. But either way, that Honda nostalgia was really pounding in my chest, you know? So I'm trying to find one, and they're hard to find. I mean, I think they've sold like 600 as of the end of Q2. So it was, you know, there's not a lot of them on the road. And I started in maybe March looking for them. And I called every dealership that I could possibly think of within maybe 1,000 miles. And I said, as soon as you get one, call me. So right around the time when this bankruptcy risk was really high, I drove the Fisker Ocean to this dealership that had finally gotten one. And they said, yeah, we found it in the corner lot in the back. We didn't even know it was here. And it probably was a demo. But either way, I'm like, hey, I'm going to go check it out. And I got there and I drove it and I really liked it. Okay. And so I thought, and my words to them were, do you want to play a little game? And it was called Find My Resale Value, because I was curious and I was going to include that in a video about it. You know, what's the resale value of the car going to be? My Ocean, that is. And they said, oh, we have all these resources. You know, we can get into, you know, we have stuff that you don't have as a regular consumer to find the value of the car. And I said, well, good luck, because I had a sport model, which is really rare. And these were $40,000 instead of 70. So I had all these things going on that were, you know, part of my experience of not being able to find a resale value. But either way, they promised me, oh yeah, we'll get a resale value right away. I sat down in the dealership after driving this Prologue and falling in love with it. And they came back and of course said, we can't find a value. I said, I know you can't, because there isn't one. Nobody sold one yet. So they promised me by tomorrow, they're going to get back with me. Well, in that time, Fisker had already dropped the price of these Oceans. So another thing that we all need to know is that Fisker has dropped the price of these Oceans. So they finally came back with a value. But at that time, Fisker had dropped the prices on all these Oceans, right? $70,000 Extreme was $37,900. And they advertised that the sport model was $25,000. Of course, there weren't any because, of course, anyone would want a $25,000 car. That's an EV. That's, that's a great deal, right? So there weren't any of those. And I did a full nationwide search to find if there were any. There were not. But because of that, they couldn't get the value right away. What they gave me, though, when they gave me the value was that number. They gave me $25,000. And so I thought, this is it. This is my opportunity to get out. And so I did that. I got out. I made a video kind of ending my saga personally with Fisker. And I started giving consumer advice on, hey, if you're worried and you want to get out, here's how I did it, right? You have to go to a dealership that wants to sell you something. You can't go to them and say, hey, will you buy this from me? CarMax says no. Carvana says no. You can't get a Tesla. They say no. So you would have had to go to one of these kind of privately owned local dealerships and then buy an EV from them. And that's honestly what a lot of my viewers did. They got Mach-E's, they got Solterras. They were getting, a couple Lexus plug-in hybrids, but they were getting plug-in cars and they were trading and taking massive losses, right? The trade-in value around that time for, I think Brian's was about the same time, and his was around $27,000, $28,000, $29,000. And for a $70,000 car after, and this was what, 6 months, 7 months?
Yeah.
That's just a horrible experience. But they were out. They now have a car with a warranty and a dealership network and all of this. And so for me, it was an emotional decision because I was being impacted emotionally by the anxiety of not knowing what's going to happen and the worry of what to do if an accident were to occur, and the complete and total knowledge that there is no service network. And you really have to be a YouTuber with a really loud voice and say, hey, you need to come fix my car, because I'm not going to lie, they probably jumped me to the front of the line to get service, right? And that's another thing we have to worry about too, is that with one point of contact with the Owners Association for Fisker, and just to go back to what we were talking about earlier, you are also going to be in a line, right? There's going to be, because these cars are going to need service. People are driving them. They're having minor accidents and faux pas, and they're needing stuff. And so you're going to have to get in a line there as well. And I didn't want to deal with any of that. So that was why I got out. And I ended up getting this Prologue. And the story behind that, I'll just really short, is that was their first sale of an EV at this dealership.
Oh, wow.
They told me I was going to get the tax credit, but then they couldn't provide it to me because the build date on this car was too early. And so I didn't know that. I mean, I've already handed them the keys to my Ocean. I've canceled the insurance on it. And then I'm standing there at the dealership and they're like, yeah, we can't do the deal you just agreed to. And so we worked the thing out where they took the difference because they had a promo, like you get the credit and a promo. And well, we get an incentive of $7,500, but no promo financing. So I really took a hit on my interest rate because they couldn't make this deal happen. And so they actually, at the end of the day, though, shout to C. Harper, they took it off the top. They actually took the difference in finance charge off the top for me, off my sticker. So in order to get the first one with a lower sticker, it ended up being okay. But long and short of it, the Prologue is expensive. It's $50,000 after all that, give or take. And so, yeah, and I financed, because of my Fisker Ocean debacle, I had a Model Y. It had positive equity. I got rid of my Model Y, which was perfect. 30,000 miles, 3 years, no service, no issues, no maintenance, no stops, literally nothing. Just in and out of the car driving for 30,000 miles. I got rid of that. It had $9,000 in positive equity. And I lost $9,000 in equity on my Ocean between what I owed and what the car they were going to give me. So I net zeroed that out, which they were able to do. But then I had to finance 100% of my Prologue. So I'm upside down on it, obviously, right now as well. So the saga is not over as far as my finances, but at least I'm in control of it now, and I can make a determination of what happens in the future. I hope that wasn't too long.
No, I mean, I think it really highlights your story. I don't think is super unique, right? Other people are experiencing exactly what you experienced of being excited about a new product and a startup and buying it, bringing this into your life, and then watching things out of your control crumble. And we don't necessarily review companies here at Out of Spec. We're about the products, but this is so essential to this industry because there are going to be startups and some of them are going to be successful. We're seeing like Rivian doing really well. And then, I mean, VinFast is doing fine, but their situation is quite different. And then Fisker, what this happens. And I think hopefully this can give folks an idea of what it's like to be a first adopter of a startup, and taking this kind of EV into your life and seeing what happens. Hopefully they don't all play out this way, but also if there's other owners out there, obviously, hopefully they found your channel and the Owners Association, but we can get an idea of just tracking this point in time for the industry and for the company Fisker.
Yeah, there's a lot of risk involved that I really didn't realize. I mean, I definitely realized it now, actually financially even, I realized it. So, quick aside, my dad has a reservation for an Aptera, and he was one of the original, like 2011. He's looking at I think they had a gas version, back when they were a previous company. And so he was like, yeah, this Aptera, it's going to be, I'm like, Dad, it's going to be great. Like I'm first of all, huge fan of Aptera, everything they're doing. They're keeping it in-house. They're, slowly rolling it out. They're getting it right before they push it out. So kudos to that. But these same risks are going to be there. Obviously, they're not well funded. That's a big thing. Obviously, Rivian, they just got some funding from Volkswagen, right? They got funding early from Amazon. They had investment from Ford. These are big companies with big interest, right? Fisker didn't have any of that. And so their big investment was this, let's just say, term-rich, risky loan. And it ended up, worst case scenario, let's say.
It did. I really do think this is the worst case scenario and hopefully something we don't see again. I do think it's interesting that the first iteration of Fisker didn't really work out. And now, again, it doesn't really work out. Definitely lessons to be learned. And yeah, I mean, I appreciate that you are taking the time, even though you're not an owner anymore, to track what's going on so that you can have the best information to tell other owners and other people out there who are just interested. I think anyone interested in EVs should be interested in this story and the truth of it too, because there's headlines, there's a lot of details, but to really get down and see what's going on, I think is interesting. I'm really going to be excited to see what American Lease does with this. They're seemingly optimistic on taking on this opportunity, as I think they're seeing it as, to not only electrify their fleet, but get it for a cheap deal and maybe, like you said earlier, make a bit of a revenue stream from it as well for the existing owners. So I guess we'll just have to watch and see exactly how it plays out realistically.
Yeah, it's going to be what it is. And there's going to be a lot of moving parts and it may adapt and evolve. But at the end of the day, the Owners Association has taken the time to try to provide some kind of future, and American Lease has been cooperative in, allowing that to continue forward. But definitely a cautionary tale. And the reason why I still cover Fisker is because I started out, I mean, I have hundreds of referrals. Like I referred hundreds of people to put money down on this car. And the best thing I can do from a moral standpoint is to follow the story to the end, right? So from a consumer standpoint, from my outside point of view, looking in, what ended up happening? And I started out with a video how I reserved it. And so I will follow till the end and obviously cover my prologue. And if you're interested in the Honda prologue, I have videos coming out on that as well. And just in my shameless self-promotion, please subscribe to this channel. They break news all the time, and it's a really good way to get everything electric related, not just the cars, but the infrastructure, the charging, everything from this. So make sure you subscribe to Out of Spec, all their channels. This is a good one though. But yeah, it's a cautionary tale. You got to learn. And I intend on providing an objective look at it. I hope I've been objective. I know I take a lot of criticism because I no longer own the car. Why would I continue to cover it? But for me, it's a moral issue.
I see that. I see that point of view, and I appreciate you bringing the facts to me. And after sitting, in these calls yourself and being generous and sharing that with our audience as well. So please, yeah, everyone, repay the favor. Check out Adam and his stuff. And if you are a Fisker owner, let me know what you're doing. Let us know what you're doing. Is this helpful? Hopefully, if you traded in your Fisker, let us know. And if you aren't a Fisker owner, but you could imagine this scenario, like what would you do? I think it's way easier to say that, but yeah, with this information, hopefully I don't know. But thank you for the information, Adam. I appreciate it.
I think you nailed it right there. The sentiment. I don't know. we still
Yeah.
have to be in a state of wonder, but the bankruptcy will continue. My coverage will continue. You guys always do an excellent job covering everything, and I will continue to be an avid supporter, viewer, and I'll recommend your content to anyone I talk to. So thanks again, Francie. It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Thank you. Really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for tuning into the Out of Spec podcast. If you're a Fisker owner, hang in there. Drive safe, stay charged. See you next time. Bye-bye.